All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. We've had about a week to digest the destruction of the Pac 12 conference with Utah, Arizona, Arizona State, and Colorado all going to the Big 12, while Oregon and Washington decided to bolt for the Big 10. Now, these departures have left California, Stanford, Oregon State, and Washington State trying to figure out their next moves. We've seen this week Cal and Stanford talking about the possibility of going to the ACC. Now, obviously, that is a long shot. It's just, Cal and Stanford are just trying to get a feel of, trying to be in one of these power conferences. And I think it would be a long shot. I mean, we talk about the travel issues, from some of these other moves and realignment. And I think Cal and Stanford going to the ACC would even be worse. Would Cal and Stanford just decide to be football independent? That's something that could be a possibility as well. But will the remaining Pac-12 schools look to add in order to keep the conference alive? The likes of San Diego State, Boise State, SMU. Obviously, just for example, those three schools would only give the Pac-12 seven. They're going to need at least three more schools after that to keep this afloat, if that were to be the case. Or would the remaining Pac-12 schools just be willing to finally put their pride aside and merge with the Mountain West? Now, all along, when it appeared that there weren't going to be any defections from the Pac 12, the hope was that they'd get their grants of rights signed. It looked like that was going to be the case last Friday morning. And in doing so, they'd begin the process of expansion. And, there were teams on the table, such as San Diego State, maybe even SMU, and all signs overall, though, pointed that if the Pac 12 was going to expand, that they'd go for some schools out of the Mountain West. However, now, a week later, it's the Mountain West that has the better footing than the Pac 12. Would the Pac 12 merge with the Mountain West, or would the Mountain West merge with the Pac 12? You're looking at the Mountain West right now, obviously a group of five conference, but they also have 12 schools. Now, at the very least, I'm going to say this. It would, just for the sake of argument, if the Pac 12, the remaining Pac 12 schools, the Pac 4, whatever you want to call them, were to merge with the Mountain West, at least we know that these four schools would have a home, a conference home going forward. On top of that, a plus for everybody involved, there's no traveling across the country. And I say that because the Mountain West region conference is really focused on the Mountain time zone and the Pacific time zone. And that right there was a strength of the Pac 12 because, with the exception of Colorado, everybody was in that Pacific time zone. Now, if you're Stanford and you're Cal, especially Stanford, with all of their varsity sports, uh, that are up to par with just about everybody else in the nation, it's a scenario where, hey, this gives you an opportunity to continue to focus, on the West Coast, if this were to be the case. Also, as a whole, for the Mountain West, let's just say they merge with the remaining Pac-12 schools, you'd have some semblance of order because then you're talking about five schools within the state of California. Once you add Stanford and Cal, and then you've got already Fresno State, San Jose State, and San Diego State. You think about, you already got Boise State and Wyoming, and now you got Washington State and Oregon State. So you have some teams, jumbled up there. You still have two Nevada schools, obviously, with UNLV as well as Utah State. And then, of course, two Colorado schools and Air Force and Colorado State. And then, once you throw um, Utah State, Hawaii, and New Mexico into that mix as well. But it's a scenario where I feel like this would benefit the kids that are in the non-football sports because all of this realignment over the last 10 years has completely glossed over the non-revenue sports, if you will, and what this has done to them as far as, these young student athletes, having to be forced, to travel out of their time regions, if you will. And I can tell you personally, from somebody who did compete in college, it did benefit us to have everything in a region. And it wasn't anything to get on a bus and maybe take a 2-hour trip someplace, a 3-hour trip, and you were good. Now you're asking some of these kids in baseball, tennis, swimming, gymnastics, you name it, to travel clear across the country just for a conference meet. And of course, the kids that are not playing football, the kids that are not playing men's and women's basketball, they are not afforded the amenities traveling like other people are. And that is something that, a lot of people have continuously glossed over. And I'll say this, if the Pac 12 and Mountain West were to merge, at least if you're the remaining Pac 12 schools, you do have some semblance of order from that aspect of it. Now, of course, another question would be, would a merger between the Pac 12 and Mountain West allow the Pac-12 to still have a seat at the big boy table for college football? I think it's going to be a long shot, and I'll say it like this. Okay, obviously, the Pac-12 was on better footing than the Mountain West before all of this started. However, once Oregon and Washington decided to make the move and say, hey, we're going to the Big Ten, I think the rule book was thrown out of the window, yes, but then also it's a scenario where that brought the Pac-12 down a peg because they were already losing USC and UCLA to the Big Ten as well. And I think losing Oregon kind of really set things in order for Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah to go to the Big 12 because remember, Colorado had already made their decision the week before. So I think it's a scenario where if you're the Pac 12, you would be a tweener because you'd probably be recognized as the top group of five conference, but you still wouldn't be good enough to be among the elitist as far as the ACC, SEC, Big 12, and of course, Big 10. It's a scenario where TV money wise, obviously, if this were to be the case, Stanford or Colorado, pardon me, Stanford, Washington State, Oregon State, and Cal wouldn't get the money that they were expected to get from a new Pac 12 deal, but it still would be better than nothing. And then on top of that, if you're the Mountain West, I think having Stanford, Oregon State, Washington State, and Cal would definitely bump, up your finances as well. So it would be something where obviously there would be things that would have to be worked out, but it could possibly work. For me, the remaining Pac 12 schools, they got to check their ego at the door because this is something that should have been done a long time ago because the Pac-12, some of the schools were still worried about being academias and this, that, and the third, and that's all well and good. I'm not trying to shut that down or be disrespectful to that, but it's a scenario of this, it's survival mode right now, and that is what the Pac-12 should have gone into several years ago, even before USC and UCLA decided to make the move to go to the Big Ten. And heck, you can go back as far as when the Big 12 looked like it was going to implode a little bit more than 10 years ago. And the Pac 12 could have had Texas and Oklahoma, and they decided not to do it. Uh, at this point, obviously, it's more, beyond survival mode for the Pac-12. It's all about desperation, in my opinion, for the remaining schools. So, with that said, they needed to add, the Boise's of the world, and they didn't. And if they had done so, it would have prevented the current madness that is taking place. Now, of course, the question would be if the Pac 12 and Mountain West were to merge, who would lead this league. First and foremost, please not George Clyde or Larry Scott. I mean, Larry Scott, obviously set the wheels in motion for the beginning of the end of the Pac 12 more than 10 years ago. And of course, the Pac 12 network, his brainchild, was a disaster from the word go. And then, of course, George Kliakoff tried but failed to keep this league together. Would the Mountain West commissioner come in and call the shots? Would it be a new person altogether? The bottom line is, if this were to work, you definitely need some leadership. I go back to when the Big East fell, the original Big East, football Big East. And, a lot of the holdovers from that Big East merged with some Conference USA schools to form the American Conference. And you had Mike Oresco, the former CBS executive, come in and run the shots. And, the American has become a viable football league. You just think about what the American has lost, in the last 10 years or so. Louisville, obviously, it was a transition year from Louisville, going to the Big East to the American to the ACC. The same can be said about Rutgers going from the Big East to the AAC and then the Big Ten. But then, if the American was not viable, then why did the Big 12 come looking at Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF? When conferences want to raid your schools, that lets you know everything that you need to know about your conference. So obviously, there was something there. You need a TV person who's going to come in and get these deals done. That is first and foremost, and you need that leadership. That is what the mold, or the role rather, of the conference commissioner is in the current landscape of college sports. So you need that wheeler and dealer who can go into these network offices and talk turkey. That is going to be, or would be, the first selling point going forward if the Mountain West and the remaining Pac 12 schools were to merge. Now, of course, just for the sake of argument, if this merger were to happen, obviously you're talking about a 16-team league for football and basketball and all the other sports. Would everybody buy in? And of course, that is the big thing, because even throughout realignment, unless it's the Big Ten or unless it's the SEC, everybody has not been bought in. And I think that is going to continue to be the case. The ACC, in my opinion, is on shakier ground than some people want to admit. The Big 12 appears to be on solid ground. But for now, when the next TV round of TV deals come up, our team's going to be looking to exit the Big 12 for possibly the Big 10 and SEC. We don't know. This is a possibility. I'll say this. I don't think, if there was a merger between the Pac-12 and Mountain West, I don't think everybody would be bought in, because I think, in my opinion, I think that if this merger were to happen, hypothetically speaking, that Stanford and Cal would be on board, but they would also be trying to bide their time to get to the Big Ten, because I think at the end of the day, Stanford and Cal still recognize themselves as elite programs and they want to be in an elite conference. But that would just come down to whether or not the Big Ten would look to expand once again. I think at some point it would happen because, like I've said before, and I will continue to say this, it is only going to be a matter of time before we get a 20-team college football conference, and it's only going to be a matter of time after that before we get a 25-team college football conference. So, with that said, it wouldn't surprise me within the next 5 years or so to see Stanford and Cal joining USC, Oregon, UCLA, and Washington in the Big Ten. I'll say this, though. This has been an interesting 90 days or so for San Diego State. And even going back a little bit further, their athletic program, the men's basketball team, got to their first national championship game before bowing out to Connecticut. It looked like San Diego State was going to join the Pac 12. They basically had given the Mountain West their 2 week notice, only to do a 180 and come back. And now, after possibly having to get that big buyout to the Mountain West to leave for the Pac-12, now if you're San Diego State, you're here in the Pac-12, in the Mountain West rather, with some of those remaining Pac-12 schools possibly come into your league. And if you're San Diego State, you still would get a footing in the viable Southern California market. So it's very interesting to see how things have worked out for the Aztecs. But at the end of the day, with this possible merger, what are the chances of it happening? I'll say this, it's a possibility. And I think at the end of the day, what we have learned over the last 10 years or so in the world of college football is that you can say that nothing is impossible. 5 years ago, would anybody have thought that USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington would be in the Big Ten? 3 years ago, did anybody think that at this point we're talking about the Pac 12 not really existing at all? This is the way that things have worked. Obviously, a lot of things hurt, UCLA and USC's programs, which forced them, or basically forced their hand rather, to try to go to the Big Ten. And of course, lost revenue for a couple of years during COVID did not help things. But nonetheless, this is the landscape of things and it's ever changing. So I do think there is a possibility of this happening. Everything is on the table right now because at the end of the day, Cal, Stanford, Oregon State, and Washington State are in desperation mode. They've been disrespected, okay, because basically their brethren, if you will, in the Pac 12 just simply said, deuces, you know what? You guys are on your own. And it's unfortunate because 2 years from now, we're not going to have a civil war. 2 years from now, we're no longer going to have the Apple Cup. And again, like I talked about it last week, a lot of people on the East Coast don't understand the importance of Stanford and SC going at it. A lot of people on the East Coast don't understand the importance of UCLA and Cal Berkeley going at it either, competing athletically, that is. And, these guys have been disrespected. They need an athletic home. Maybe this works. Maybe it worked. And I think if it does work, like if as far as these two conferences, if you will, come together, I think it would benefit everybody involved. And I think at the end of the day, the Mountain West as a whole, not just football wise, could have some solid ground because, again, one of their selling points, regardless of the sport, is hey, if you're a kid that's looking to play collegiate athletics at the Division 1 level and you're on the West Coast, guess what? You get an opportunity to play in a conference where you don't have to travel all across the country for a conference game. Your mom and pop and your family and friends can come see you. And I'll tell you like this, if you're in the Southern California region, you that know you, even if you got to go up to Northern California for a conference game, it's a lot easier than telling people, hey, you know what? Hop on a plane and come cross country to me to see me in the Chicago area or in the Michigan area or the Pennsylvania area just to see me play a conference game. So that could be some footing for this conference potentially to build upon. Will the Pac 12 or the remaining Pac 12 schools, rather, and the Mountain West merge? I don't know. Should they merge? In my opinion, yes. But like I always say, I don't have a foot at the table, a seat at the table in these matters. I'm just speaking my opinions. And at the end of the day, let's see if egos will be put aside and let's see what the next step is going to be for the remaining Pac 12 schools along with the Mountain West. So, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you have not already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. Now, you can check it out. Drop a line and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So, once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin, and I am signing off. And I'm saying take care and have yourselves a wonderful day.